So yeah.
Welcome to the Sleep Experience podcast, where we take a deep dive into the latest sleep hacks, gadgets, and strategies to skyrocket your productivity to new heights. Being a high performer is all about resting at 100%, so you can execute at 100%.
Side effects of medication, they weren't doing anything for me, so I felt like my back was up against the wall.
Hey, this is Riley, host of the Sleep Experience podcast. At the Sleep Experience podcast, we interview health experts and teach our community how upgrading their sleep is the one thing that they need to unlock their biological code and maximize performance in an effortless way by doing more with less. Do you want to become a productivity machine, have genius ideas automatically pop into your mind, stop feeling so stressed, build better relationships, and generate more income? Optimizing your deep sleep can do just that. Visit www.thesleepconsultant.com to learn more. My guest today is Stefan Chmelik. Stefan is the co-founder and inventor of Sensate, a sound technology helping people to relax and sleep more. Practicing medicine for 35 years and meditating for 50 years, Stefan has a deep understanding about how we can improve the stress of the human body, having well-being, and achieving states of peak performance and flow. Stefan, welcome to the show.
Riley, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I've had Sensate myself for the last couple of years now, and it's definitely changed the game with me. Having a very stressful day, and then within 10 minutes, feeling like I can go directly to sleep has been really profound with my performance, deep sleep, and everything else. And it's really been reflected on the Aura Ring and my other clients as well. But I'm very curious, how did your journey in sound and technology to help people relax and this journey you've been on all sort of begin?
Yeah, well, great to hear about your experience. And obviously we love, in particular, talking to people that have already used Sensate, that know the benefits. And it's great that you're seeing the results in, objective measurements like your Aura Ring as well, which is fantastic. I come from a kind of musical background. So dad was a jazz drummer. My brother is a musical savant. I used to play in early punk rock bands in London, so not everybody's type of music, but a musical background. And I go into nature and I compose and record sounds and ambient soundtracks from nature, which then forms the basis of the soundscapes which appear on the app, which you hear in the headphones, and then you play with the infrasound on the device itself. As you mentioned, I've been meditating for a while. Dad taught me and my brother to meditate when we were very young. And that's kind of been a major influence throughout my life going forward. And therefore, obviously informed my work as a clinician. So I started using sound decades ago, really, in the treatment room. Initially just sticking speakers under pillows and then kind of graduating from there, really. As it became really clear that people's response to sound was profound and in many ways beyond words, and that you could elicit kind of treatment responses in people that weren't possible using other techniques. So I ended up using a bed, a special zero gravity couch that was developed actually for the US Army, for soldiers that were coming back from Iran and Iraq with PTSD. And it was, showing fantastic promise and great results. And that involved 4 big infrasound transducers, which you listened to while you had headphones on. And actually, I used to love it when patients cancelled, because it meant I could jump on the device and have a session myself, which was great. And actually, it was on one of those sessions that I had this kind of eureka moment, and I realized that you could get rid of most of the hardware by turning the body into the hardware, by turning the body into an instrument. And that's really what the technology does. It uses the chest capacity that we all have and the unique architecture of our rib cage in a very similar way to the way that cultures have always used vocalization to produce internal resonance and profound state change in mental emotional conditions. Riley, I've lost your sound. I don't know why. I can't hear you. Suddenly lost sound. I don't know why. You just suddenly gone. You can hear me?
Can you hear me, Stefan?
I can now, yes.
Oh, you can now. Oh, interesting. Don't know what happened there. Sorry about that.
I don't know. I don't have to. I'm sure you can edit that out.
Oh, I've got a whole editing team that can do all this for us. No problem at all. Yeah, we can just continue off. I can just kind of speak as the user.
Yeah, I didn't hear what when I finished speaking. I didn't hear you from then on. So take it from there.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's amazing, Stefan. And speaking as a user, having over-the-ear headphones, playing the soundtrack, whether it's sleep, focus, getting into that flow of the zone or calming the mind, and then having that vibration on your chest and pulsating into your body and the dance between the two. It's just so, at first I've done it to some of my brothers and things like that. And it puts them to sleep or puts them into whatever zone they want, way beyond any kind of binaural beats or anything else. So I highly recommend anyone really go and check it out. One thing though, for a lot of listeners who maybe don't know a lot about what happens inside of our body when it is stressed, could you talk a little bit what's happening inside of the body? Whether it's heart rate variability, maybe the vagus nerve, the mind. I know it's a very in-depth question, but overview of all that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, we live in unique times, right? For good and for bad, and our bodies, our minds, and our bodies in particular have developed over hundreds of millions of years to get where they are now. And one of the main reasons that the human beings are the premier species on the planet is because of this very well-developed threat perception mechanism that we have. So that's enabled us, although it's come very close several times and human beings almost didn't make it. The fact is we are the dominant species on the planet. And that's partly because we survived and passed on our genes. And there's two implications to that, right? One is that it means... and this is useful and helpful to understand, is that human beings are somewhat, therefore, hardwired for anxiety. Because the overly laid-back humans didn't make it, right? It was the ones that were a little bit paranoid, a little bit anxious, the ones that hoarded, the ones that were wondering what was in that cave. They're the ones that survived. That is, if we understand that that's actually the blueprint, that to be slightly paranoid and anxious is how we've evolved to be, then that can be quite helpful. The flip side of that is, that we have hundreds of generations of human experience to fall back on, and that adds to our resiliency and potentially our anti-fragility as well. On top of that, though, of course, is the enormous technological change. The exponential curve, which has been happening since the Industrial Revolution, but has been speeding up, which is the nature of exponential change, right? It speeds up at its own rate of increase. So, there's been more technological development in the last 20 years than in the previous 1,000, and that rate is increasing. So, human beings are unable, neurologically, physiologically, mentally, emotionally, to keep up with that. So, it's really not surprising that we spend a lot of our time feeling overwhelmed, and that becomes so much the norm that we don't even notice it. So what was it? One of my colleagues was telling me the other day that we receive in the what we call the developed world as many impressions in a day as a 17th century peasant would receive in their lifetime.
Wow.
So so ads and all emails, all the stuff, so it's just a total, complete and utter neurological overload. And the only way that really we've evolved to cope with that is by having our threat perception mechanisms tweaked. And although those are great for survival, they're not great when the nature of the threat is actually just simply overload and overwhelm rather than actual threat. Because there's nothing to run, when you've got too many emails and you've got too long a to-do list and you're not sleeping enough, and there's nothing to run away from, right? There's nothing to fight. And actually freezing doesn't get you anywhere either. So you're in this state of heightened alertness, heightened threat perception with nowhere to go. So it's kind of like having loads of coffee and then trying to go to bed. It's probably not going to work.
Yeah, good luck.
And I think we get so used to that we actually don't notice it. And, you see this, right? So when people do relax, often with Sensate and other meditation techniques, if they're able to do them, which a lot of people can't, when they do relax for the first time sometimes in their life, or certainly for many decades, they really are shocked by what feeling relaxed and what feeling different is like, because they're just not used to it.
Yeah, it's been their normal.
And there are a number of senses which the body has, particularly which are involved. So we have maybe 30 senses is now the thought, many more than the 5 that we classically think of. And there's particular senses on the inside of the body which help process information coming in and how our internal mechanisms deal with that. So something called proprioception, which is the ability to feel ourselves in space, and is closely related to connective tissue and fascia, which is a very important tissue that we can talk about a little bit. Neuroception, and interoception, which are how we regulate the experience of the internal world with the information we're receiving from the external world. So if those senses are well tuned, then that relationship can be productive. If they're overwrought, then that relationship can be very troubled. And you mentioned the vagus nerve, and one would think that the vagus nerve has just been discovered from the excitement that so many people and the medical press in particular are having about the vagus nerve at the moment. In fact, we've had a vagus nerve, of course, for about 800 million years, much longer than we've had a human brain, what we might call a human brain, and that's a big part of it, right? So we have these bodies which are very ancient, and the lower brainstem and autonomic nervous system, which is very, very, very ancient. And therefore, the connections between those parts of our body and our cells, our muscles, our organs are very, very hardwired. In the last million years, let's say, we've developed another brain. We've developed the frontal brain, the human brain, which is wonderful. That gives us the ability to build spaceships, but it also means that we are always looking for meaning and context and purpose in the things that we're doing. And quite often, and feeling overwhelmed doesn't particularly have any meaning. It's just simply the experience of feeling like there's too much data coming in and you can't process it. But our brains will continue to try and look for some information within that. And that usually then is that turns into what we call anxiety. And all the physiological symptoms that are related to that. Yeah. So although the vagus nerve is very old, we are now appreciating much more its functions. So it's part of the autonomic nervous system, the part of the brainstem and downwards into the spine, which controls all the functions that you don't really want to have to think about. You don't want to think, now I'll have a heartbeat, and now I'll breathe in, and now I'll make my digestion work. All this stuff happens without you thinking about it, which obviously is great. And the vagus nerve is the largest nerve within that system. So although it's part of the system, it is very important. And it's a big part of the work of Dr. Stephen Porges, who's a Sensate fan, actually, and the originator of polyvagal theory, which is a whole for anyone interested in the vagus nerve, it's a very interesting thing to look into. And it talks about the explanation of how the internal world processes the outside world and how the vagus nerve is involved in that process.
I know he has the safe and sound protocol, right? With the polyvagal theory and everything. I've heard pretty good results.
Stephen is a big fan of using. Yeah, he's a big fan of using sound, which I think is why we get on well. He understands that sound and music and physical sound have great power to affect the nervous system in a way that talking actually doesn't.
Yeah. Got it. Well, I think that's really interesting. And people talk about the vagus nerve and the vagal tone. Like the more healthy your body is, it's kind of like your heart rate variability. The less inflammation you have, the more sleep you get, the healthier diet you eat, the more fit you are. That heart rate variability can go up. Can we say the same thing with the vagus nerve? And obviously, stress is more than just the vagus nerve by itself, but something known as like vagal tone. Can we improve? I don't know if efficiency is the right word of that vagus nerve, but it's adaptation to stress. The more we use potentially the Sensate device or these different health modalities, can that help increase that vagus nerve
Yeah.
tone?
Yes, is the short answer. The longer answer is vagal. I see vagal tone very much as the ultimate metric. And Porges does use the term
Okay.
vagal. Yeah, he talks about vagal efficiency, which I think is a lovely term as well. So I think it's good to think of vagal tone as being upriver, being the source, and that everything else is downriver.
Okay.
So you talk
Got
about
it.
your heart rate variability, blood pressure, gut peristalsis, breathing. All these functions are controlled, not entirely, but largely by the vagus nerve. So the better the vagal efficiency, the greater your body's ability to adapt to whatever the changes might be going on. So improving, so I would say really, we're going to do one thing, improve vagal nerve tone, because everything is downriver of that.
Got it. And so when Sensate now comes into the mix, what is that doing to the vagus nerve in our entire body with our heart rate, with our brain waves? How does that all fit into one picture?
Yeah, so improving vagal nerve tone using sound, particularly low frequency sound, is what we do. That's quite different to vagal nerve stimulation. It's a subtle difference, which not everyone understands. But we're not using using electricity or microcurrent to stimulate the nerve. Which as soon as you use electricity, you can make a body part do something it wouldn't actually choose to do within its own self-regulation ability. You can actually override that. With sound, what you're doing is you're encouraging the body to work optimally. And if we look at all the things that we know have an impact on vagal tone, then we can see how they're sound related. So from gargling and humming, meditation, chanting, any kind of sound that we're making in the chest, being in nature, human connection, compassion. Dakar Keltner, professor of psychology at University of California, Berkeley, talks about the vagus nerve as being the origin of compassion. It's the thing that makes us care. Yeah, so when we see suffering in somebody else, our vagus nerve should fire. That literally is its purpose in many ways, and that enables. There are survival advantages to that. That's how human beings live, and a few other animals, but human beings in particular, live in these extended communities, and look after each other. Which is why human infants can be born entirely helpless for many years. Because we have been able to have infants which require many years of parental or caregiver support, whereas almost no other animals are in a position to do that. And that's the caring, compassionate function of the vagus nerve. So heart rate variability is a fascinating metric. It's one that a lot of originally really started in elite athletes, and it's now being used in the kind of wider well-being and biohacking field. It's not terribly well understood, and it's not terribly well measured a lot of the time. And I think there's a certain amount of misunderstanding around it. In theory, in actuality, it's the microscopic variation between interbeat intervals. So you don't want your heart, you don't want any body function to be absolutely like a metronome. Because then it has no flexibility. Something which can't bend is likely to break. So having having good heart rate variability is not the same thing as having an irregular pulse, but it's the ability for the pulse rate to be able to be flexible. So if you run upstairs, you don't faint. Yeah, and if you're a bit hungry, you don't faint. Yeah, so there's lots of functions which heart rate variability is involved in. But as I say, the thing downriver of HRV that actually regulates heartbeat, blood pressure, heart rate variability is vagal nerve tone, which is why that's the metric I like to work on.
Yeah, I think going to the source is always a better idea, ultimately. And what do you think if somebody's trying to improve their vagal tone, their heart rate variability? Maybe they are a biohacker. Is just doing, living a healthy lifestyle enough, or is technology and more advanced methods needed in today's day and age?
I was on the panel last weekend at Oxford University at the International Trauma and Mental Health Conference. And actually, the role of technology in mental health was the subject. And so I don't think we're going to do this without technology, is the question. I mean, within the room we were talking in, there was a significant chunk of the globe's trauma and mental health practitioners, and pretty much all the world's best and most renowned lecturers were there talking on the subject. So it's a very thin line of experts trying to hold back a tidal wave of billions of people. So if we accept the point I made earlier, which is that we're all somewhat neurologically overwhelmed as a baseline, and then of course there's hundreds of millions of people who are really overwhelmed, who are highly symptomatic. So people with trauma, people with PTSD, people with acute mental health problems and chronic mental health problems. So the available experts aren't able to manage this. The health system can't manage it. The veterinary association, vet association, the soldiers can't manage it. So the only way we are going to manage the kind of numbers we're talking about, and these numbers are significantly higher post lockdown. There was already a problem pre-lockdown, and there's a massive problem now. The only way we're going to manage this is by teaching people and people learning how to regulate themselves through the use of technology.
Yeah.
And for me, this is about body technology, what I call somatic technology. So there are limitations of information that you hear via your ears. Whatever it is you're hearing, whether it's sounds, whether it's music, whether it's words, because it has to be processed by the brain. Yeah, we don't sound. Sound is the only sense that's always on. We don't have the eyelids. So we filter out sound a lot of the time, but it does have a direct connection to parts of the nervous system. But of course, it also has to be processed by the brain. So as soon as information passes through the brain, then we start to analyze it. And as soon as we start to analyze it, then we leave our body. And because, as I said, we've had a body for hundreds of millions of years and many, many times longer than we've had this kind of cognitive brain. Really, it's in the body that most of these somatic symptoms are embodied on the whole. So, and actually, the body has quite a narrow dictionary, if you want to call that, of physical symptoms. So if your hands are a bit sweaty and you can feel your heartbeat and you're looking around a bit and you're feeling a bit anxious, you're either having a panic attack or you're in love. And actually, they're pretty much the same. So it's the context which makes us decide whether we like it or we don't like it. And I think the thing about vagal nerve tone is that it ties directly into what is called anti-fragility. So I think heart rate variability is a great metric for resilience. Yeah, so that's why it's very useful for elite athletes. How fast do you recover? How much damage can you take? But it doesn't matter how resilient something is, eventually it's going to break. Whereas anti-fragility is a uniquely biological mechanism. It only applies to living organisms. That includes us. And it's the ability to grow back stronger after some kind of stressful event. So sometimes it's referred to as post-traumatic growth. It's the reason that trees grow back stronger after a storm. In the Arizona biosphere, where there is no wind, they have to hold the trees up with wires, otherwise they'd fall over because they have no need to develop anti-fragility.
Oh, interesting.
And the way I like to describe it is that the opposite, the antithesis of anti-fragility is comfort. And that's what we see, right? As we become the more comfortable we become, the less anti-fragile we become. Yeah, the bigger our bed, the more comfy our bed, the more central heated or air conditioned our house, the more electric light we have. The less hungry we are, the less cold we are, the less hot we are. Our ability to adapt when those things happen gets smaller and smaller. So our comfort zone also gets smaller and smaller. So if you want to develop anti-fragility, which will then increase resilience, you want to extend your comfort zone to its maximum by being tolerant of discomfort, which is not a message everyone wants to hear, right? So my message is that you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable in a controlled way, right? You don't want to sort of take all your clothes off and run outside in a snowstorm if you're not used to it. And you don't want to dive into an ice bath if you're not used to it either. Yeah. So you have to titrate this experience over time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just simply become overwhelmed. And it's overwhelm that leads to trauma.
Yeah, exactly. I think, basic things like with that, you take a warm shower, last 10, 30 seconds, put it to cold, just all these micro things you can do throughout your day. I think building up and you can, adapt to that amount of stress. And I really like what you said, because, I've worked with so many people where they've told me they just cannot sit down and meditate because their thoughts are just racing. So they need some kind of training wheels to kind of get them to that point, to bring them to that kind of rest and digest parasympathetic state, to bring them from, they're revving in 6th gear. How do we get them down to 3? Okay, once we're at 2, now we can meditate, start to, calm down. And so I think the Sensate device is so good for that, because it provides, no matter how we're feeling, it brings us back in rhythm. It kind of retunes our guitar to the rhythm that we want to feel grounded, relaxed, and feel like our best selves.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And that, what you just said was exactly the inspiration for designing Sensate. As one of my colleagues, Michelle, says, you can't fail at using Sensate. You can't, you can't do it wrong. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas it's very easy to do meditation wrong. What I noticed in the clinic was 10, 15 years ago, I was able to give people meditation exercises, say 45 minutes or an hour, and say come back in a month, and they do it. And then over the years, it got less and less and less. And it got to the point where I was saying, okay, look, just use this 10-minute app meditation exercise. And they would come back and they would say, I tried listening to that track on the app, but I was looking at my watch, waiting for it to finish. And actually a significant number of people, when they notice, and this is the issue with mindfulness, which is a beautiful technique, but hasn't changed the world in the way that many of us hoped it would, is that the ability, as soon as you look inside your own body, as soon as you notice your own breathing, you cease to be distracted. And if you think about our behavior, so much of it is based around distracting ourselves from how we feel. Because when you notice how you feel, and actually you realize it's not great, then it's very easy to tip over into panic. So if you want to make somebody have a panic attack, the best thing to do is to go up to them and say, and now notice your breathing. And half the people will run out of the screaming. So for many people, when they notice their breathing, they start to hyperventilate. So it was through placing the sound on the body, combined with sound in the ears as well, right? Because the brain does like sound. The sound is a wonderful thing. But in many ways, the part of the orchestration of the soundscape that is heard through the headphones, in many ways, its main purpose is to keep the mind amused while the actual work takes place on the body, on the soma. So the use of low frequency infrasound on the body, and the vagus nerve runs right behind the sternum, the chest bone here, right? And that's where the Sensate device goes, right in the center of the chest, where it hums, it resonates with low frequency sound, so you can't hear it. But when you pop it onto a resonant surface like bone, it transmits that low frequency sound into your hollow thoracic cavity, your chest. There's a lot of air and space above the diaphragm, in the heart, in the lungs, all around that area. And it's interesting because air is actually a really quite poor medium for the transmission of sound. In a solid medium. Yeah, so solid medium are much more efficient. So, whales can hear sounds 16 kilometers away underwater. We now know that elephants communicate via infrasound through their feet. So it's taken ages to work this out. That how does this group of elephants know there's a watering hole 20 miles away? They're communicating using low frequency sound through their feet, which is amazing, right?
Yeah. Totally.
So the point being that our bodies have these deeply ingrained responses to low frequency sound. And anyone that's hummed or sung in the shower or chanted or performed mantra will know this. As soon as you do that, it makes you feel better. The difference with Sensate is that it's passive. So you're not doing it with your own body. You're not doing it with your throat. The resonance is coming from an external device, so you can actually just relax and let go and not have to worry about whether you're getting it right. So the mind,
that does so much at once.
Yeah, the mind can have a bit of a holiday, which is really what needs to happen for the body to reset. The mind needs to let go. And that's the hard bit for humans. The hard bit is not interfering with the wisdom of the body.
Yeah, right. Really, really tuning into it that way. Can you touch a little bit more on the body, what you were saying with somatic experiencing? You've heard of someone who worked with Freud, Wilhelm Reich, and some other people after him. They would look at the body and, there's books like The Body Keeps the Score. There's trauma release exercises. There's all these different things, and we can develop this sort of muscle armoring. And even if you look in the wild, if some mammal is chased by a predator and they get away, you actually see them shaking their body to really discharge that. But we don't get that in our day and age. We're really just so isolated in our mind. And over time, those sort of muscular holding patterns sort of develop an armoring. And that's where when you see somebody with a stiff body shape, you'd say, that guy always looks like he's nervous. That guy looks, more like he's relaxed. So there's really something to that. Could you touch on that a little bit?
So emotions are much more held in the body than the mind. Neuroscientists now accept that consciousness is not in the mind. The mind, we think, is the most complex piece of machinery in the universe, it seems. And it's, the brain is amazing. But consciousness, whatever that is, because we still don't entirely agree what that is, doesn't reside in the brain. That we're pretty sure about. And actually, the references you just made to The Body Keeps the Score and Peter Levine's work, I was with Peter, Deb Dana, and Bessel van der Kolk on the weekend. So what Peter Levine found, indeed, is exactly that. So in the wild, animals in the wild aren't traumatized. They might get eaten. Yeah. But if they escape, as you say, they shake and they're fine, right? You don't get PTSD in animals in the wild. You do it, of course, in zoos, etc. You see highly traumatized animals in zoos, but in the wild, animals, they live or they die, and if they live, they're okay. Trauma seems to be a relatively human, unique phenomenon. Music also, by the way, seems to be a uniquely human phenomenon. Animals do sing, and animals certainly make noises, but music, as we can understand it, as a complex language, certainly that can be written down, that can be recorded, seems to be uniquely human, which is, really interesting because the survival advantage is not obvious. It doesn't help reproduction. Being able to sing doesn't help reproduction unless you're a bird. But for humans, it doesn't tend to help. So why did we develop music? And it's probably something around, caregivers singing to infants increased survival advantage. So there is a reason for it. Because there tends to be a reason for most things, including art, etc. Which isn't to diminish the subtlety or the spiritual aspects of those things, but we can find evolutionary answers as well. And they can quite happily sit side by side. So it's the body seems to be where thoughts, feelings, emotions, and trauma is held. So in somatic experiencing work, when you very, very carefully titrate somebody through a trauma, and what they remember about the trauma, what somebody is aware of the traumatic event that happens to them, is somewhat immaterial. Yeah, because again, the body doesn't use words. The body uses feelings and sensation, and as long as your nervous system processes it, then it tends to be. And processing tends to mean a bit of shaking, a bit of tingling in the hands or the feet. Yeah, and this is usually neurological processing. The other thing that we've relatively recently, really found is the importance of connective tissue. So fascia as a sense organ. So fasciology is now a subject. It's only 2 or 3 decades old, which in medical terms is not much. As they say in medicine, medicine advances one funeral at a time. You tend to have to wait for the professor to die off before any new ideas can come through. So the understanding of fascia is still, regarded as a relatively new kid on the block. But it is now largely accepted as the body's largest sense organ. So proprioception, the sense of your body in space, takes place in the fascia. A lot of really important hormones that some of your readers will be interested in, like leptin and ghrelin, which are the appetite and satiety hormones, are produced in the fascia. When people are doing cold water therapy, what they're really working on is the fascia, turning brown adipose tissue into white adipose tissue into brown adipose tissue, which is the metabolic fat, which contained within the fascia. And fascia is about 75% water and hyaluronic acid and other substances. And it's essentially water in like a gel-like solution. If you've got like a mouse pad or something with a gel in it, it's kind of pretty much like that. And it travels everywhere in the body. It literally goes everywhere. And as I mentioned, water is a fantastic propagator of sound and vibration. So sound travels many times faster in fascia in your body than the speed of the fastest nerve conduction impulse. So nerve conduction impulse is, let's say, 400 meters a second, which is really fast, right? If you stub your toe and it's got to go a couple of meters to your brain, that's really fast. Stub your toe, ow. Yeah. There doesn't seem to be any time delay. But speed of sound in water is 1,500 meters a second. So what that means is that your body is experiencing sound and vibration before your nervous system tells you it's happened. And also because fascia, because connective tissue goes everywhere in the body, it also connects every cell. Every cell is filled with intracellular fluid, surrounded by other fluid, connected into fascia. So, we are in many ways, we're up to we're between 75 and 96% water. We are mostly water, surrounded by membranes. Yeah, that's how we enabled ourselves to flop onto land, is by getting our fluids and wrapping them in membranes and wrapping those in membranes and wrapping those in membranes and flopping onto land. So we are basically water inside membranes. Really, it's what we are. Mineralized water, which is why minerals are so important. That's why magnesium is so important for sleep, because we need to remineralize our fluids back to a state which is much closer to the salinity of seawater and the mineral content of seawater, for our body to feel at ease and to move into homeostasis. Which is why you get these movements when somebody processes trauma. And it's why you also get the freeze response when people aren't processing trauma, because it's held in the body. It's not held in the brain. So, you can have, and let's remember that psychotherapy, talking-based psychotherapy, is very young. It's been around for maybe 100 years or so. So it's a very new discipline. And what and over the last 3-4 decades, the advances in psychotherapy are those within body-orientated psychotherapy. Yeah, so things like somatic experiencing, like EMDR, etc., where you're not using words so much as you're working with somebody's body to process a traumatic memory.
Yeah. That's a lot of the time you'll see cognitive behavioral therapy. It's been around for a while, and that's kind of a go-to for a psychotherapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. But it's effective to some degree, but the transformations I've seen from some of this body work has been revolutionary. EMDR, sometimes EFT. I mean, there's a lot of body things you can look at, but I think that's really fascinating. Any last words of wisdom, Stefan, before we close things off? The future of health, what excites you about where all this field is going, or anything else?
We're living older than we've ever lived on the whole, or I think actually that trend is in the process of reversing in the United States. I think the current generation may be the first generation in history to live lives less long than their parents. And I think we have to consider what are the reasons for that. So it's not, of course, just about how long we live. It's also about the nature and the quality of the life that we live. And I don't just mean physically how comfortable we are, because as you know, I'm a big fan of becoming tolerant to discomfort. But it's also about the impact that we have with these short lives and this short time that we have on the planet. So how, my creed, if you like, is what can I do? In what way does any action I perform help somebody else? Sorry. And if we bear in mind, as I mentioned, that the vagus nerve is the nerve of compassion, and that by caring for somebody else, we make our own vagus nerve fire, then actually there is quite a reciprocal arrangement there. By caring for others, we actually get something back. Even if we don't get something from that person, we actually give ourselves something. So I would encourage everybody really to think, every action I perform, how can this be of service to somebody else?
Love it. Thank you so much, Stefan. I learned a lot today, and I'm sure our audience did as well. If people want to learn more about what you do, can they just go to getsensate.com?
Yeah, that's the best place. You can leave messages with us there or at hello@getsensate.com. We're always thrilled to hear from people that have questions. Our users have run something like 50 million minutes of Sensate time now. So as part of my vision to impact the lives of 100 million people by 2025, we're moving in the right direction.
Amazing. And we'll put that all down in the show notes below. And if anybody wants to get 10% off, they can put the Sleep Consultant in the promo code during checkout. And again, for those of you watching, that's what it looks like right there. So thank you so much for tuning in today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to learn more about how sleep can benefit your personal and business life, visit thesleepconsultant.com. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Sleep Experience podcast. We'll see you next time on next week's episode. Be sure to subscribe and follow us to get future updates on everything sleep, energy, focus, stress, and better performance.